Alright everyone, we start off today talking about why if Trump does decide to run, and he'll probably make that decision not long after the midterms because we have a perpetual election season after that anyway these days. It's been that way for a number of cycles. Here's why he will almost certainly win, be the nominee. That doesn't say anything necessarily about the general. We don't know who the Dem candidate will be. It's unlikely to be Joe Biden. I think it's considerably less than 50-50 at this point that he's permitted to run by the rest of his party. If he does, he loses handily, and I think that somewhere in his addled mind, he probably knows that too. Kamala's technically the top of the billing just because if he's gone, she's the technical incumbent having been sitting VP. I don't know that the Democrats want her to run either. I mean, what's she going to run on? She's been a complete absentee. She's more like a Dick Cheney style vice president. As opposed to one that's maybe more out there and actually doing something. She hasn't even visited the border despite being border czar in the last year and a half. So I think that ship of state would sink before it got out of the dock. Here's 7 reasons that I've compiled why I think that if he chooses to run, again requisite partially on midterm results and partially on the health issue. If Biden croaks tomorrow or something, Trump is more reluctant to run because then the age issue definitely is on the table. If Biden resigns, rather doesn't choose to run, or he gets kicked out, that could reduce the chance too, because Biden will be told by his party, please say that the reason why you chose not to run was because you felt too tired and drained. That way we can keep Trump and Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders out of the White House, the 3 people they really don't want to be in that position. They don't want any of them to even run. Especially Bernie, because then, of course, it doesn't help them with leftoid turnout when he loses the primary, which is an inevitability. Here are the 7 reasons. Number 1, he only has one major competitor in the Republican field. The Republican field is barely stronger right now than the Democrats, their field. They've got their incumbent Biden, who's elderly, unlikely to run. They've got Kamala, who is desperately unliked. Her approval rating is so deep in the shitter, she makes Pelosi look palatable. They have a bunch of old people that similarly to Biden probably wouldn't run, Elizabeth Warren, etc. They have a handful of people, like they have a Klobuchar, they have Buttigieg. Those would be probably the most electable candidates they could field. Buttigieg is a one-term mayor who came in 6th place, or 5th place rather, last time around, and now is transport secretary. Again, largely an absentee on world politics. Klobuchar is single-mindedly yammering about censorship all the time. The Republican field is scarcely better, though. Other than Trump and DeSantis, you don't have a star-studded list there of people that are likely to even run. And DeSantis, the only other major competitor, if he runs and someone runs against him, none of them can beat him other than potentially DeSantis. But DeSantis has basically ruled it out. He has insinuated that if Trump runs, he's sitting it out. He's perfectly content to be a very popular governor in a state that Trump would need to wine and dine. That's good for your state, by the way. When you're a swing state and you're going to be targeted heavily, you get a lot of money from that. Well, the people of Florida would like that money, and DeSantis, I think, is perfectly content with that situation for the meantime. Secondly, as happened in 2020, a large proportion of states, because of Trump's technical incumbency, and this is something I don't see anyone pointing out, would suspend their Republican primaries. They would simply vote to give Trump the delegates. They would say there's no reason to hold a primary. He's technically the incumbent. He has effectively the right to run. Nobody else is running that can win. Why should we bother prolonging the process and have the Republican candidates attack one another when we can just have one unscathed opponent going up against the shark tank that is the Democratic Party, giving them a little bit of an advantage. I think that a third of states would immediately suspend their primaries. And it'd be a struggle. You know that the never-Trumper forces, which I'll get to in point number 7 here as far as Congress certainly goes, they would want the primaries to continue. They'll try to bring up the issue, well, this is anti-democratic, this is terrible, you're just trying to force Trump on us again, why don't we let the people decide? I don't think that in the end will be a winning argument, though, because of Trump's massive in-party support. The other part is that people like Bannon have been subsuming the local party structure. The delegates and the individuals that make the decision about whether the state will have a primary at all are being overrun by MAGA. Well, obviously, they're not going to want to have a primary process if they can just give the delegates to Trump. Third, Trump correctly predicted the current state of affairs in the United States with almost greater accuracy than most commentators did. There's now a supercut of him doing just that. It goes beyond saying, well, if Biden's elected, you'll have $5 a gallon gas and they'll go after guns. It's a laundry list of predictions, all of which at the time sounded hyperbolic and dire. The legacy media panned him and said he was fear-mongering, but they've all basically come true. He would be able to run singularly on the platform of Miss Me Yet. I think that his slogan, if he runs, should be enough is enough. Steal it from the Democrats, say enough is enough, and promise that on day one you'll get rid of all the energy regulations, restart Keystone, and say, look, we're going to tackle things the old-fashioned way by getting people to actually produce things, and I'm not going to throw trillions in funny money into Green New Deal horseshit. I think he could win on that singular platform, especially if Biden is his opponent or anyone associated with his administration. They're all tarnished by virtue of being adjacent to him. Number 4, Big Don is an attention getter. Right now, he's only active on Truth Social, and yet he still makes headline news every other day. When the news isn't talking about some latest attack in Ukraine, or Biden's latest gaffe, which they never want to talk about, or economic data, or some SCOTUS decision, it's all Trump. It's still a 24/7 Trump channel on half of these groups. In Truth Social, by the way, it won't matter that he's segregated, this is point number 5, from places like Facebook or Twitter, because people endlessly replicate whatever he posts from his own network. If anything, it'll just make his network much larger, because then it's candidate Trump instead of in exile Trump. Well, that's more exciting. All the journos will have Truth Social accounts because they'll be lurking there waiting to make their next stink piece. So, and also, there's always the possibility that he gets let back onto those platforms, because there's really no argument that you can make that multi-billion-dollar corporations should be preventing an active presidential candidate from a mainline party from being able to use their platforms when their opponent is. It would look so terrible in optics. It would look so horribly lopsided. I think even some liberal individuals would pressure them to say, again, enough is enough, just fucking let him speak. Number 6, and this is an important one. Trump's got a very large fan base in the GOP, as well as a very large and I think now again growing number of independents that support the concept of bringing Trump back. They want revenge. Think about it for a million reasons, largely at this point economical. Think about the honking that happened in the last election. There are people who think that it was honk, and they want revenge. What better way than to Grover Cleveland, Donald Trump, get him back in for a non-consecutive term, making him even more legendary than if he was just straight up elected a second time. Honk. There's nothing that the powers that be like more than a hero other than a hero who falls. There's one thing they like even more than that, and that's the hero that falls and then gets back up again. A redemption arc. That's another point. I don't have it listed here, but I think it's pertinent. People love that sort of shit. It's almost like a soap opera now, is it? The person achieves great things, but then they fall from grace and they crawl around in perdition. They have to wander through the wilderness. They're in exile or something, in Napoleon style, quite literally. Napoleon being literally invoked right now by the legacy media pertinent to what Trump's doing. And then they get back up again and they come back and say, fuck you. Oh, Americans especially love that shit. And then finally, the never-Trumpers, especially on the congressional level, are falling like flies. It's 5 down and 5 to go for the House Republicans that voted to impeach. I think it's 6 and 4 now. 5 of them not seeking re-election, if I remember correctly, and then one of them just lost their primary handily without a runoff, by the way, the other day in South Carolina. Liz Cheney's on the chopping block in August. She will lose as well. My thought is that probably there aren't going to be a whole lot of never-Trumpers left in Congress. By the way, this is great. One of the worst things about Trump's first couple of years in office was that there were too many people in Congress, GOP members, unwilling to work with him. They withheld money for the wall, etc., etc. But most of those positions will have been displaced by MAGA, and the Democrats won't have a House majority, so the purse strings will be in the control of populists. Trump will be able to do effectively much of what he wants, even without the consent, by the way, of the Senate through budget reconciliation. So people that worried that Trump didn't accomplish enough, that still have Trump derangement syndrome, can get off their high horse and just admit, well, it was Congress at the time that was doing that. This Congress is going to be massively different. You're also looking at gubernatorial slots. state attorneys general, fucking sheriff's departments. They're all being overthrown by MAGA right now because of a groundswell of grassroots support. For all of these reasons, if Trump were to run today, I would expect him to be the nominee, and I would give him a huge advantage in being reelected. Okay, part of it's the Grover Cleveland effect. People want that shit. As far as DeSantis goes, if Trump doesn't run, yes, DeSantis, if he announces, is the front runner. If he doesn't, I hate to tell you this, but Ted Cruz might end up actually being the Republican nominee, in which case I wouldn't vote for him. Unless the Democrat was such a sleazebag that they were beyond the pale. They'd have to be worse than Biden somehow, and there are some Democrats, I think, that would be like that. Kamala Harris comes to mind. Ted Cruz would be one hell of a hold-the-nose vote, considering his multiple sellings outs of the U.S. public and of his party, of course. I'd rather have Rand Paul in the absence of Trump or DeSantis. I'd vote for him any day of the week. But I think Trump is geared up to run. Everything points to him wanting to run. There's nobody who can stand in his way if he does run. He starts off probably with a third of the delegates just from states canceling their primaries. That's about all. Peace out.